Hi everyone, it's Jennifer Lively with CCPL's Tech Team, here to talk to you today about Microsoft Word and specifically about how to create and format a table in Microsoft Word. So you may do this instead of using Excel to manage a list, to actually have a form that someone could type into, all sorts of options there. But I'll show you how to create that table and how you can resize columns and rows and how you can input text and align it just the way you want. I'll also show you that you can include some form fields like checkboxes and drop-down lists to create a form that could be saved and completed electronically using Microsoft Word. So that may be something new for you, and I hope you'll enjoy that today. I use that all the time, so I think that you'll enjoy it. So grab your computer with Microsoft Word and see if you want to run through these steps with me. Looking forward to showing you something new today. All right, well, I have our training laptop here. This is a Windows 10 Dell laptop, and it's already all set with our latest version of Microsoft Word, which is 2019. So I'm going to use our Start menu to find that program. You should have a Start menu in the bottom left. When I click there, you'll see lots of most used. You can scroll through alphabetically, but we have already pinned Microsoft Office and specifically our Word little thumbnail here to the Start menu. So you can do that at any time. Just a little tip here, if you see something you'd like to pin, you can point to it in the alphabetical list and right-click to see some options. So we have Word right where we need it. I'm going to come back here and click to open the program. As I mentioned, this is Word 2019. It's going to open here to our start page where we can choose to get started with a blank document. We'll go ahead and click there. I will mention that many of you are using the subscription version of Office called Office 365, so you may see some options that look a little different, but most of the things that we're going to use today are going to be in the exact same place and look very similarly. And so I do believe that you'll be able to work along with me even if you have a different version of Word. So we have a blank document. I am going to come down here to our status bar in the bottom right corner. You have your little option to zoom in. There's a plus sign there. I'm going to click, click, click so that we can see the page a little bit larger. Maybe that'll be helpful for you. And I am going to create a table here on this blank document. Now, first I do want to give my table a name. So I'm going to just type directly on the page, and this is for temporary employees. So we're going to say temporary employee form. Now, as I press enter, you'll see that gives us a little extra space there. Now, that is the normal setting in Microsoft Word and has been for several years, several different versions, but you may prefer the no spacing option. And I would encourage you to do that with tables especially. So if I click on no spacing just here in the Styles Gallery on the ribbon, then from this point on where my insertion point is blinking there on the page will be set as no spacing. And again, that is kind of important for your tables. It will become a form for us. Now also notice some of the defaults here in our font group. This is Calibri 11. I'm going to bump this up and we're going to work with size 12. So you may be familiar with the drop-down list there. I just came over to the increase font size icon and clicked there once so that we can have a table based on Calibri as the font, but size 12, again a little bit larger, and that no spacing is part of that formatting for the table as well. So then we're going to come up to the ribbon. You know, the ribbon has different tabs here that allow us to get to different options. And I'm going to choose Insert. And that's where we'll see the option for Table. So I'll click on Table. Now this grid allows you to just kind of point and choose the number of rows and columns that you would like to create in your table. And the most we can get there is 8 rows and 10 columns. So if you know you're going to need more than that, you could simply come down to Insert Table. That dot, dot, dot in that menu shows us that a dialog box is going to come up. And we're going to say that we would like to have 3 columns. So we could type or we could click. I'm going to go ahead and just type a 3. And I'm going to press the Tab key to move down to number of rows. So we'll go ahead and choose 15 there. And we're going to click on OK. And there we have a table to get started with. So it'll take a little formatting to get us to the point where this really looks like a form, but it is important to kind of do some pre-planning to know exactly what you would want someone to type into a form like this. Of course, if you're using a table for a list, you could kind of go about it a little more organically, where you just start typing and do some sorting and things later. But for this, we really need to have some planning involved. I know that I'm going to have the person type or fill in on the top line, and my label is going to be down below. So I'm going to click in that first cell of that second row and type name. And when you're working within a table, you can press the tab key to move through those different cells. So I'm going to move on through. They would be typing on line 3 there. So in line 4, we're going to type hire date and press tab. We're going to type employee ID and tab. And then lastly here, we'll type status, and that'll be full-time or part-time. We'll see that in a little bit. So we'll move on, leaving a blank here for them to type. And next it's going to be their street address. We'll need a nice long row for that. Moving on down, city, state, and zip code. So we also want to know some information about when they worked, how many hours they worked, and so forth. So we're going to press the tab key to move on down and have a little section here that starts with dates worked, hours worked, and total earned. All right. Now, as for the formatting of this, just know that if you've been typing and you change your mind, or you need a little bit more, a little bit less, you can always add and remove your rows and even your columns there. So first, if we realize that we needed to have another row here at the bottom, because we have enough room for 5 days of work, but not for any kind of totals below that. So I'm going to click in the very last row, that first cell, and then I'm going to move up here. Now, I haven't pointed this out yet, but now on the ribbon, there is a little section there called Table Tools, and there are 2 new tabs on the ribbon, one for design and one called Layout. Now, if you have this version and previous versions, don't be confused that there's a Table Tools Layout, Table Tools Design, but also a regular design and layout here too. So always kind of look above there. But when we click on Layout under Table Tools, you'll see that we have the options here for rows and columns. There's a group for that. And we can simply insert below. You could also insert above. You could insert left or right to have more columns. And you could even come here to delete, and you'll get lots of options there. In fact, you could delete the whole table there too. So that's where your choices for that would be. So that gave us an extra row at the bottom that we needed. But as we look at our existing cells, they're not really set up the way that we want them to be. For instance, I want all of this to be a nice long section there for someone to type their name. We don't know how much space they may need for that. And so if I come up here to the first cell, you'll see my insertion point, and click and drag to highlight all 3, then I can move up to that Layout tab under Table Tools, and I see the option to merge cells in the Merge group. So I'm going to click on Merge Cells, and now if I click away, you can see that those 3 cells have just turned into 1. I'll do the same for Name. I have to highlight all 3, and then choose Merge Cells. Now that can be a little tedious because you do have to go row by row. Otherwise, you could take multiple rows and merge them into 1. We also need to do that here for street address, merge cells, and the line above street address where the information will actually go. All right. Now, as I mentioned down at the bottom, we do have room for dates worked, hours worked, total earned. But if I really want to know the total earned, I'd also need to know how much they're making per hour. Maybe that's assumed, maybe that's going to change day by day, and so we would need to be able to split that. So what I can do here is highlight part of a column, and instead of merging the cells in that same merge group, I'll click on Split Cells. It's going to confirm that I'm going to turn this section into 2 columns with 7 rows, and I'll OK that. Now don't worry that some of the spacing is off there. It's not going to be evenly distributed right now, but we can fix that in a little bit. So here we're going to type hourly rate. So that would allow us to figure out how much should be earned there. Now, in order to make sure things are evenly distributed, there's a quick fix for that. If you want to do something that affects the entire table, I want you to notice as long as we're pointing to the table, our cursor somewhere in there, you will have this little button here in the top left, a little four-headed arrow. We usually associate that with moving something. And in fact, you could click and drag that to move the table, to reposition it. A little tricky sometimes, but that is the concept. You can also click there, however, to select the entire table. Now, once it's selected, notice here on the Layout tab, you have Distribute Rows and Distribute Columns. We're going to simply choose Distribute Columns, and now you can see that all four of those columns at the bottom, where we started with 3, are nice and evenly distributed. Now, you can also adjust things like the row height. In a form like this, it might be nice to have the room where they're actually typing a little bit higher, a little more room there than where the label is. Now that gets a little tricky because we have to do some fancy highlighting. But I want you to notice when you come outside of the row, your cursor is a little pointing arrow there. And if you click, it does select that entire line. So it's not really selecting the row, it's the whole line there. If you hold down the Control key on your keyboard and select the next line that you'd like to highlight, you can actually keep that Control key held down while you click, and here we're selecting any of those lines where we would have typing, okay? And so what we're going to do here is choose a specific row height. Now we'll do that on this same Table Tools Layout tab, but you'll see here on the far left there is a Properties command. When we click on Properties, it opens a dialog box right now that is showing us a tab for Table. We want to address the row height. So choose Row, check the box next to Specify Height, and increase that row height. I'm just going to click and drag over the 0 so that we can type here to 0.4. Now, how did I know 0.4? Obviously, you just have to try something that is in inches, so just kind of guess what you would like it to be. I am going to choose here that it's going to be exactly at 0.4. Doesn't mean it won't grow if you press enter or type a little bit more in there. It will, but that'll be our starting point. When I click on OK, you can see that that has changed. One thing to note just by the highlighting, if someone were to type above name right now, it's actually going to have their text positioned at the top of the cell. That may not be what you really want there. So we can simply change that by coming up and choosing Select All. And then we're going to come up here to the alignment options, and we're going to choose this Align Center Left. What that will do is drop that down so that the vertical alignment from top to bottom will be perfectly centered there. There's one little row down here that's just a separator that I did not highlight and merge, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. We'll have that nice and even there too. And then we're going to move on and do some more formatting. So as long as the table is selected, you're somewhere in the center, we could come here to the Design tab, and you'll see that there are some pre-selected table styles here in the gallery. So if you point to any of these, you'll see how the table will be affected. It has to do with borders and shading and all sorts of formats there. Some may be perfect, and then others you may have to kind of finesse a little. Now, there are more choices that we can't see now. Remember how these galleries work. There's a little arrow pointing down, but then there's also this More button, and that's going to show you all of the styles. You might have to scroll a little bit, but easy access to all of those styles. I'm going to come to this List Tables section here, and we're going to find one of these that is in the List Table Light row. Now, that's just a kind of a personal preference that we have for this particular exercise. So it's really just a matter of pointing and seeing that live preview to determine what color scheme you like, what you'd like to work with there. And you can click to choose one of those. Now, again, it may not be perfect to start. I'd like to see even more borders here. We may need a little more formatting. There's some bold text that maybe doesn't need to be there. So notice here that this table design is selected, that table style is, and that includes here on the left the things that are checked. There's a special header row right now, meaning it thinks the top row is special. We don't see any text there. Remember, that's where the name will be typed in, but we might need to make sure that that's what we want. It's just going to bold it, so we'll leave it alone. The banded rows, we like that because that means every other looks a certain way, and we like that the labels kind of stand out in that way. But the fact that the first column bolds those different labels there and the others aren't, maybe that doesn't work for us. So we can uncheck that box, and then that formatting is removed. Now we do want to apply some additional borders though. So this is where you would come in and select the entire table again, making sure that what we do will affect that whole table. So if you'll notice, there is on the same design tab a borders group, and I like to start by choosing the color. So we're going to come here to pin color, click on the down arrow part of that command, and we're just going to find a color that will complement the colors that are already involved in our table style. I'm going to choose a really dark blue. Your cursor looks like a pen because you could actually draw those out, but what we'll do next is make sure that the line weight is what we want. Its default is 1/2 point. We're going to click on the down arrow and choose 1 point, kind of working our way up those. And now we're going to choose where that would be applied. So here where it says borders, you click on the down arrow. We have different choices here, but I'm going to point to all borders, and now you can see how that really affects our form and how it kind of comes to light a little bit better here of what our intentions are. So choose all borders, and we're all set. Now, one thing though that we still would like to change is that for under hours worked or dates worked, that section, you can see that we do have some banded rows where maybe we don't need them to be. So I'm just going to come here over to the left margin to do a little highlighting, and that's going to be up here in the Design tab under Table Tools for shading. Click on the down arrow, and we could simply say no color for those. So our very bottom border is special because that's going to be where our totals are, but individual days will not be banded. So that'll work well for us. Okay. While we're down here, just going to make one quick change to those labels. I'm going to come to the left arrow. Now earlier on the Layout tab, we chose a specific kind of alignment for the whole table, but for this I'd like it to be centered. So we're going to come to the Home tab and simply choose that center alignment icon that's in the paragraph group that you may be very familiar with. As soon as we do that, you'll see it shown that way. So the form itself is pretty much done. Anyone could come in here above name and start typing. So if that was our intention, to maybe have a form that we print out and just have someone write into, or at best it could be something we send them by email and they're able to save a copy and type into, that's fine. But we haven't really formatted our title at all. So let's take a second to do that. I'm going to use that margin method of clicking to highlight the entire line. We're going to come up here to the font and the font sizes. We didn't change our font before. We just left it as Calibri, and that's great. But maybe for the title, I'll come through and choose something like Bookman Old Style. You can see those live previews as you point. For the size, we can make it considerably larger. I'm going to bump it up to 26. We're going to bold that title. We're going to center that title. We're going to come back over here to the font color icon, click on the down arrow, and choose the same color we did for the border. You may or may not remember what you liked for that before. Okay? Now that's great. We have our form. But remember, there are some ways to further format it to create a fill-in form. Now here's the tricky part though. That includes a tab here on the ribbon that we do not readily see. You have to add in a special tab. You may not have known that you could do that. All you need to do is right-click on any one of those ribbon tabs. I'm just going to right-click there on Mailings so that I can get into Customize the ribbon. Dialog box will open, and focusing here on the right side, you will see all of the different tabs names here. And the one that is not checked, one of those that's not checked, is Developer. I'm going to have you check the box for developer, and we'll click on OK. And now a developer tab is here. So if our goal is to have an electronic form that we could send to someone and they could only type into the parts of the form that we have designated, we've set up fields for that, this is how you would go about it. We'll click on developer, notice my blinking cursor is here above name, and we have a controls group. Now today I'm only going to focus on the legacy tools. So if you click on legacy tools, there are some legacy forms included. Now the ActiveX controls would be necessary for anything that's going to be hosted online, but that's not how we're treating this particular form. We're saying this is just something you would email to a staff member, something they could have on their computer to fill out using Microsoft Word. So we're going to focus on these legacy forms. For something like name, we simply want to use a text form field. So if we click there, you'll see that form field pop up. And if you double click in the center of the form field, your options will appear. You can choose regular text, makes sense, but notice some of these other options. You can choose a maximum length, so you could put a number of characters there. For a name, we may not know, so we'll leave that the way it is. You could put in some default text if you wanted to. And for text format, you could even say, make sure the first letter of each word is capitalized. So you could do that, or title case for each word. You could also do it that way to be capitalized. So those are some options that you have when you're dealing with a text form field. So we'll say OK. We could use that same one for the street address. Makes sense. So I can right click and copy. I'll click here for street address, right click, and I'm going to come here to the paste icon. All right. For hire date, still going to be a text form field because it'll be typed in by the person. But if I paste the same form field there, I could simply come back and double click and change it from regular text to date. And I could choose a date format here by clicking on the down arrow. And I could say perhaps I like the MDYYYY. We'll click on OK. For employee ID, could be something similar. I'll add a new one here just to remind you where it is instead of pasting. We'll come to Legacy Tools, Text Form Field, and we'll give it a double click so we can see the options. Regular text is fine, or we could say number. And if you know that all employee numbers are 4 digits, you could say, I want it to only allow 4 digits there, that sort of thing. Number format's not going to change, but since this is the first number field we're really seeing, notice that you can have different decimals, you can have dollar signs, percentages, you have those sorts of options. We'll OK that one. Now for the status, you may remember that we said that would either be full-time or part-time. So I'm going to come up to the legacy forms. I'm going to find here our little checkbox. We'll check. And then it's going to put it in. Now you'll see later that it actually makes an X in the box, so it's not a check at all, but that's how they do it. So we would want them to check that box if they are full-time. Then we can kind of move over a little. I'm going to use Control-Tab to actually tab over within that same cell. We can put in yet another checkbox, and this one would be for part-time. That should fit in there. All right. So city would be like street address. I'll take just a second here and copy and paste that. Zip code would be like your employee ID, similar, so I can copy and paste that one. The only difference, and I'm going to double click, is that we don't want to leave it as a maximum length of 4. We'll just say a 5-digit zip code. Now, I think that number format changed a little bit, so I need to get it back to 0. Click on OK. Now for state, we'll use this one as an example of a drop-down list. So if you come up to our legacy tools, remember our little toolbox here, and you'll see an option, third one over, for drop-down form field. So I'll click there. Just looks like a form field to start, but when you double click, the options box looks a little different. So for the drop-down item, let's just say we are in a tri-state area, and we're going to say it's either Georgia, add, South Carolina, add, or North Carolina, add. There's no easy way to pull those states in or any of those lists in. You just have to type each item as you go. Now you can resort them though. For instance, if we wanted this to be in alphabetical order, North Carolina is selected, so we could go up one, and it would be now Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina. And we'll OK that. Now it will default to Georgia for now, whatever the first item in the list is. You'll see how that drop-down arrow appears once this is ready to be filled in. All right, now we're at that point. We're going to say that this part would just be kind of filled in, but if you wanted the employee to fill out any of this electronically, you would actually use this developer tab to restrict some of that editing. First step, you want to click in the first cell that would be used by the other person. And then we'll click on Restrict Editing here in the Protect group of that developer tab to see a task pane here on the right. Now what we want to do is choose some editing restrictions. So we have to check the box next to allow only this type of editing in the document. We're going to click on the down arrow, and we're saying filling in forms. Choose that. And when we say yes, start enforcing protection, you have the option to put in a password. There is no way to recover that password, so if this is used by anyone else, I just would not recommend it. Most people wouldn't try to get past this restriction anyway, depending on what kind of form it is, I guess, but you have the option just to OK this with no password. Now notice what happens once the restrictions are in place. I could come here and type, Thomas Sullivan as a name, and when I tab, it's just going to take me to the individual form fields. So if my hire date was 4/8/16, when I tab, it changed that format because we chose a date format there. If my employee ID here is 3481, but I accidentally hit a 0, there's no 0 showing up there because we've restricted that to only 4 numbers. As far as choosing your full-time or part-time status, that person could simply check the box and would be able to choose that. Now, there's no way to tell them not to choose both, but we just hope they'll use good sense there. And we could come down to street address and type anything they would want to type there. No restrictions. Now, I did not, should show you this. If I would do that without capitalizing drive, when I tab, it'll do that for us because we chose title case. All right, ready for this city. Again, if I type Charleston and tab, now you'll see that capital C. We'll come here and choose South Carolina from our drop-down list. And for the zip code, if we tried to type a dash and add more, we said only 5 characters, so it won't allow us to do that. Right, and now I press tab again, and it took me right back through the form fields. So the person has no access to clicking or changing any part of the form that is not a form field, because that is the type of protection that we added. So remember, the person would have received this by email, saved it to their computer, filled it in, maybe saved it, updated those changes to send it back to the employer, the HR department. And when that other person in HR receives it, they can then stop the protection and move on and do some other things with the form. So I'm not going to spend much more time on the form, but let's just say that we do know they worked, we'll say 1/13/21, no special formatting here. We'll say that on that day they worked 7.25 hours at a rate of $14.85. So we want to know the total earned. Just keep in mind that there are a couple of formulas that you can actually use here in a Microsoft Word table. Let me close this Restrict Editing panel so you can see this better. I'm going to come back up to my table tools, back to layout, and there is a formula option here on the far right. I'm in the cell that would hold the formula. I'm going to click, or the result of the formula, and it defaults to equal sum left. So it saw on the left here that there were some numbers. Close, I'm going to remove sum and replace it with product. Now, I did that in capital letters, but that wouldn't matter. And as soon as I OK that, I can actually see the answer there. We'd have to get out the calculator and make sure that was true, but I can see that. Now, if I just type in some other numbers here, all right, we have some different total earned. If I come to the very bottom here where the weekly total earned would be, I can go to formula. It is looking now sum above. It's guessing that for us. That'd be correct. I can OK that and see what that employee is due for the week. So there is our temporary employee form for Mr. Thomas Sullivan. We have created this fillable form and sent it to him so that he could fill in some of that information. And then on the other end of that, put in some of his earnings there and showed you how to work with formulas even in Microsoft Word. We often associate that with Excel, but here you go. So many things that you can do. I just really encourage you to explore the Table Tools tabs, Design and Layout. Create a little table of your own there to see all of the different options that are available to you and all the things you can do. I hope you enjoyed working with Microsoft Word and seeing what you can do with tables and forms. I want to remind you that the Tech Team is here to help you with any of your technology needs. You can give us a call at 843-805-6885 or drop us a line at our email, techteam@ccpl.org. We look forward to talking with you real soon.